So, beginning at the beginning, we, I think probably mentioned in the past, it's not so much what we do, but why we do what we do. The motivation, the motivation behind our activities. Um, Outwardly, it can appear very holy, very spiritual in nature, but inwardly, it could be quite something else, and therefore the results will might not be what we desire from the time and energy we're putting into what we're doing. So it's very much dependent upon our motivation. You know, I talked about the fact that in general there are two types of motivation in terms of going for refuge. You know, our refuge is more or less where we expect to find some solutions to the basic problem of the human condition, or at least some temporary solutions, some time out, if only temporary. So, you know, there's causal, and then there are the resultant. And the resultant refuges are something internal to ourselves, something that we could, a potential that we all have. You might say, I don't know, an inner Buddha, if you like, our own eventual awakening, or just more or less our flourishing, or a sense of well-being. Life becomes we become a little more skillful in how we go about our life, how we conduct our affairs, and therefore we encounter less problems, and we're able to develop a certain wisdom, and being able to find some deeper solutions to our difficulties in life. Life, as we're going to talk about in terms of the immeasurables of love and compassion and so forth, life is problematic. I don't know if you've ever noticed that. Maybe I'm just projecting it on you. But it can at times be difficult. It can be downright painful. So what do? We've tried to, as best we can, with whatever resources we have, with our present understanding and our strategies, we try to deal with it. We're all looking for happiness in one way or another. That's the human condition. It's almost what it means to be a sentient being, approaching avoidance. And we approach that which we conceive as bringing about our well-being, pleasure, happiness, whatever, you know, however we want to call it. And we withdraw from that which we see as threatening to ourselves in some way. So, you know, this from a single-celled organism all the way up to the complexities and mystifications of human being, we're all very much the same in that regard. So, you know, the inner life, in terms of resultant refuge, is Buddha. I don't know, you know, I've done quite a bit of, I guess, relatively a lot of study. I don't think I was a very good student, but nonetheless, I spent a lot of time in front of a lot of wonderful teachers. And I'm still not quite sure what a Buddha is. You know, I'd like to think, you know, sometimes I look at my teachers and I say, well, I'd like to have a little of that, something like that, or, you know, happy, healthy, loving, sane human being. That sounds pretty good to me. I'd like to be more of that in my daily life, both for myself, but maybe also for those, you know, for others as well. So the inner focus of our life becomes Buddha. Our wisdom and love and compassion, skillful means in how they're expressed in our daily life, by means of the Dharma, you know, the techniques, the teachings, the meditations, the practices. But and also we go for refuge to Sangha, and I think this is terribly important. You know, our fellow practitioners. You know, like Sangha can be like almost like what do you call it? A greenhouse. you don't call it a greenhouse, do you? Where we, these fragile shoots of wisdom and love and so forth, and other ways of being, are temporarily protected. It's a safe environment where we can begin to experiment with other possibilities of who we could be and how we could connect and relate with others. And that's I think it's. I don't think it's just the Robe Sangha. I think it's people like you, who, we can teach each other, we can advise each other, we can share a shoulder to cry on if that's worthwhile, maybe even supply material needs if that's what's called for. Whatever it takes to help somebody along their path, we can be available in doing just that for each other. And I think that's very valuable in the practical terms. And we, again and again, tries to raise the level of our motivation, the why behind and the purpose for, so that it's not done just for our own piece of chocolate cake. One of our perhaps basic problems is that we're so wrapped up in our own problems at the exclusion and expense of others. So beginning to, we have to deal practically with our own problems. That's necessary. It's our responsibility. But at the same time, we have to be able to have some perspective that others have their problems as well. And part of our own problems is being so terribly wrapped up in our problem. And that by sharing in others' problems and helping them in whatever way we can, as a simple byproduct of that, we're helping ourselves. And in order to help others as skillfully as possible, we have to become more in ourselves. The more we have, the more we have to give. That's like some kind of eternal truth. So if you would like to, this is kind of formalized in a prayer of going for refuge. So if you'd like to recite along. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Okay, so we're looking at the Four Immeasurables, sometimes referred to as the Four Divine Abodes or the Brahma Viharas, and we've discussed the first of these in terms of loving kindness. Okay, I'm still not used to all this technology. So Zella shared the handout, which lists and just in a very terse fashion gives us some idea of how we go about the Four Immeasurables. So we looked at loving kindness, and I think it's useful in following the advice of the Dalai Lama, where once he gave a talk in the course of his talk, he mentioned loving kindness and how important it was. Obviously, he's the embodiment of love and compassion. But in terms of loving kindness, we translate it that way. Jampa is a Tibetan term, but he emphasized the word kindness. Yeah, it's less problematic. There's less complexities to that notion. Simply being kind, being gentle, and our demeanor, and being there for others in whatever way we can. Wishing them well, wishing them happiness. This sense of, and the way it's translated from the Sanskrit or the Pali, metta or metri, is simply friendliness, being a friend. I like that. It's something I can identify with. It resonates with me, and first and foremost, not maybe foremost, but first at least, befriending oneself. all of oneself, even perhaps the parts that you don't especially like about yourself, coming to some understanding rather than treating them as parts of ourselves harshly and trying to compartmentalize them and suppress them in some way, as if they weren't there. But we have to come to terms with even the parts of ourselves we don't like, and this might mean coming to a friendly terms with them. But maybe even just a truce. Let's have something like that. So we've looked at kindness or loving kindness, however we want to translate it. And we're going to look at the second of the four immeasurables, immeasurable compassion. Before we do, any thoughts or comments that you want to make before we move on? Okay. So the second of the four immeasurables. Oops. And there we have it. The immeasurable compassion. Okay. So essentially, it just simply means may all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. So I probably won't use that screen, Zella. Thanks. So loving kindness is concerned with happiness. May others be happy, may they be well. Compassion is concerned with suffering. And moreover, not just suffering, but the alleviation of suffering. So love and compassion, they're sort of the other side of the coin. They complement one another. Loving kindness has a vision of about what could be, about what we wish to be, happiness. And compassion is a witness to about what is, about what we wish not to be, and that is suffering. So loving kindness focuses on the positive side of the human condition. Compassion focuses upon the negative side, the feeling tone of life. So in discussing loving kindness, we mentioned that there is both, for each of the four immeasurables, but we discussed in terms of the four loving kindness, each of the four immeasurables has what's called a far enemy and a near enemy. And by enemy, I'm not sure if that's a very good term, but an extreme antagonist and something which is in opposition to, both in a very gross or extreme and also in a subtle sense. So the far enemy of compassion is, that is to say, the extreme, the gross opponent, or that which states of mind which stand in opposition, is maybe, we could use a lot of synonyms, but essentially cruelty, which is a harmful attitude that wants others to suffer. It's a cruel attitude. So that's pretty obvious. That's why it's called an obvious, or the strong enemy, or the near enemy, far enemy. The near enemy, it means it's so close to us that we sometimes that which is close to us we don't even notice. It's not apparent. We take it for granted as in some sense. So the near enemy of compassion is pity. In the face of suffering, pity can easily be mistaken for compassion. That's why it's called the near enemy, or the subtle antagonist, because superficially it may appear, even to ourselves, as a type of compassion. Pity is, and if you want to question this, you're quite welcome to, as we go along, make some comments. Pity is one part arrogance and one part sympathy. We feel bad about someone. We feel sorry for them. I'm not talking about pity here. When we lose sight of the commonality of the human condition that we're all experiencing, that we're all involved in which we all share, we can easily mistake the less fortunate objects for our doing good. But good done to another, as if, as if to an object, really doesn't have all that much spiritual worth. And here I'm getting into a sense of feeling thrown around this. There's a feeling of superiority, a feeling of self-righteousness. We're saying, in terms of how we're expressing in our relationship to this other person, I feel better than you. I feel warm and good about myself and what I'm able to do for you. With such an attitude, beneath the superficial help that we may be, in fact, be able to give, that we might be able to provide, we're saying we are encouraging the recipient of our help to possibly feel worthless about themselves, maybe even more worthless than they already feel in their difficult condition, what they're going through. That it's difficult for someone in need to struggle against the pressing attention of someone who's undermining them by doing good at them. They're almost like an object. There's a subject and I'm over here, and there's this person I'm doing good at. There isn't the sense of commonality, of sharing. No one needs us to, essentially what we're saying is, no one needs us to feel sorry for them. Compassion is not a relation between a healer and a wounded. It's a relation between equals. It becomes real when we recognize our shared humanity. That's why, the two types of bodhicitta, the two methods, not two types, but the two meditative traditions for developing conventional bodhicitta, the awakened heart, the awakened mind, whatever we want to call it. One begins with equanimity, the other equality of self and others. That's the basis. So all of these positive, heartfelt emotions are based upon a sense of commonality, of an equality between the other and myself. Here, otherwise, we can mistake pity for compassion. So, okay, so far, any thoughts around that? Does that sound reasonable? Okay. Compassion. And, Bill brought this up last time, is the desire or the wish, and I think Bill said he didn't particularly, maybe he thought of a better word than wish, but and by all means, in all of these, it's useful. The words aren't set in concrete. We have to find words which unlock, which help us to access feelings. So whatever words work for you, make use of those. Change the wording in some way. Compassion is the desire that someone, whether ourselves or another, be free of suffering. And moreover, and this is another element, a desire, a willingness or a desire, a wish, if you like, to alleviate that suffering. It matters to us. It means it's affecting us. I can't simply be an observer. We're moved. But this becomes problematic. And, we're talking about, in all of our meditations, our self-development, there is some resistance to change, whether it's very subtle and sometimes it's very deep. It's useful to recognize what is in opposition. Here, if we really are honest with ourselves, if we really reflect and dig into ourselves, the world, and talking about the desire to alleviate suffering, the world is full of suffering. I don't know if you've ever noticed that. Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan, your next door neighbor probably. You don't have to go all that far, but nonetheless, we get some sense that there's suffering going on out there, not only in here. So, the world is full of suffering. We see it daily on the television, pictures of wars and natural disasters, famines, this kind of a raw and unfiltered anguish of others. And we feel, and we can easily feel, I can't do anything about it. We may not articulate that even for ourselves, clarify that for ourselves, but there's a feeling of powerlessness around this, of ineptitude, if you like. So there's an instinctive resistance to the feeling of compassion. In the etymology of the Sanskrit term, and it's mentioned in that handout, is the Sanskrit term for compassion is karuna. And the way it's explained in the teachings is, the etymology is, it comes to mean that which destroys happiness. Or we could say, rather than destroys, it supplants our ability to be happy. In the face of suffering, we temporarily lose the ability to be happy if we're affected by it. That sounds quite reasonable, logical, rational. I can't be happy when I'm being affected by some suffering. I mean, even though it's not my suffering, it's out there. Some friend or my family, or maybe it's even Gaza, or maybe it's Ukraine or Sudan, wherever it might be. But when that's being felt by me, I'm not able to be happy at that moment. And I want to be happy. Therefore, that feeling of mattering becomes an obstacle to something I want, that I desire, my own happiness. So there's some kind of resistance to compassion, because it temporarily supplants the ability to be happy. And I think there's a logic in that. We lose our ability to compartmentalize our feelings, and therefore ignore pain. And we're afraid that where this might lead, that we'll lose the little happiness that in fact we do have. That compassion will burst the little bubble in which we usually reside. And we all have our bubble that we like to find refuge in one way or another. So we have to be motivated to stick a pin in the bubble, to be willing to step out of our this compartmentalization of these states, to resist this inclination to become indifferent, to resist, to isolate ourselves from at least the outside pain. But we do that with inside pain if we can, in some way or another. So I'd like to bring up, I'm going to share the screen, hopefully, if I can do this. That didn't work. Oh, no, this. Yeah, here it is. So this is a quote by Jeffrey Hopkins. So many of you are familiar with the translation work of Jeffrey Hopkins, and he's written a number of books. He's been in, I don't know if he's still writing these days, but he's been when I was back in the old days, when we used a chisel and hammer and stone to write books and so forth, before the computers. Jeffrey was quite an important transmitter of the Dharma from the East to the West. And here he's talking about the Dalai Lama. So I'd like just to read this quote from Jeffrey Hopkins, but it's about the Dalai Lama. During lectures, when the Dalai Lama talks about compassion, he begins with all sentient beings and pauses. You can feel that he is extending his thought to many different types of beings. His voice cracks a little. Sometimes there are tears. It is as though he is saying, don't be afraid, don't hold back from such deep feelings. So there's a natural feeling of sadness. Every state of mind is conjoined with a hedonic tone, with a feeling, somewhere along a spectrum of pain on one end and bliss to another. Usually it's somewhere, if you're like me, somewhere in the neutral zone, somewhere in the middle, okay? But nonetheless, there's always a feeling tone associated with every state of mind. And particular states of mind are normally accompanied with particular feeling tones. And here, there's a natural feeling tone of sadness associated with compassion. And though it's uncomfortable, it's not comfortable to feel compassion. I don't know if... Nonetheless, it's a feeling worth feeling. You know, we have to be motivated to not draw back from uncomfortable feelings all the time. Some are worth feeling. I mean, this goes in our everyday life in many ways. From a strictly dictionary point of view, sadness has negative connotations. You know, we feel sad. If we feel sad, we feel unfortunate. We feel bad. Maybe we're missing somebody. Maybe we did badly on an exam. Maybe we don't have enough money to buy something that we want. But from the point of view of our practice of Dharma, though we feel sadness associated with that compassion, there's also a feeling of something else alongside it, and something truly precious. If for only a moment we've set aside the protective armor that normally surrounds our hearts, and we are in touch with the human condition in which we all share, what it means to be the ordinary people that we are. So the word sad, and I was for a number of years an interpreter, so I was quite interested in the meaning of words and the etymology of words and finding the right words and so forth. So I hope I'm not belaboring these points on the meaning of words and so forth, but I think there's a real richness and depth of thought behind them. So the word sad has the same root as satiated. You know, along with sadness that accompanies compassion, we feel a sense of fullness. You know, our hearts are filled with the world, and our eyes maybe are filled with tears. You know, the moment we blink, the tears overflow and run down our cheeks. With these tears, with that feeling, there's a subtle sense of relief. We're in touch with the tenderness of our own hearts, and there's a deep feeling of almost, and this is a difficult word, but nonetheless, there's almost a feeling of sacredness in that, in being in touch with the tenderness of your own heart. That with that sadness comes, our lives are made all the more fuller, richer, more meaningful because of it. And it's really worth feeling. It's what we're saying. It's what we're, along that. So, but, our resistance to compassion even goes beyond our aversion to uncomfortable feelings in general. And this is going back in part in terms of our own makeup, our own past histories, which we can't, the past is always present in some ways or another. Limitless beings implies limitless suffering. When we begin to open our minds to what these teachings are directed us toward, limitless beings implies limitless suffering. In the course of developing immeasurable compassion, we can fall into worry, anxiety. How could we be a practical benefit to anyone if we begin to think of the miseries of the world and all that suffering that's going on about us in that way? We wouldn't be if we're filled with anxiety and worry and so forth, we wouldn't be a benefit even to ourselves, let alone someone else who might need our help. We have to bring, and I talked about this last week, and I think We have to bring our practical, what I call practical wisdom, which is generally termed skill and means, if you like. Through our own lived experience, we've come to certain understandings which we didn't have when we were children. A child has compassion, but he or she lacks the wisdom to express it skillfully. For example, it would be unwise to give an alcoholic a drink of alcohol, even though they might desperately want it. A child might say, "Oh, here, take it, take it, take it." The immediate alleviation of suffering. But that wouldn't be wise in the long run. We have to bring some kind of wisdom, understanding, skill. We would be of little practical use, even though we had compassion. So we need to bring this practical wisdom, and with our caring, even with our deep caring, without becoming bewildered and afraid. We often, and this carries over into perhaps other areas of your life. I don't know. Maybe I'm projecting on you. So you can take it on or not, you can consider it or not. We often connect intense feelings, and here we're talking about compassion, with what it must have felt like to be a child in the face of overpowering suffering. In the face of suffering, when you're a child. You don't have the skills, you feel powerless against that. It's a feeling of being overwhelmed. We refuse to open our hearts to compassion due to associating it with something with which it need not be associated. That is to say, we're no longer children. I don't know, but sometimes we regress, don't we? We fall back into our childhood mentalities and we view the world out of those eyes. And it can be quite frightening. So out of compassion, we're moved to respond, but it is ourselves as adults how best and when to respond. What is and is not beneficial. Just like giving that drink to an alcoholic is not beneficial. We can make that decision as an adult and not as a powerless child who doesn't have the skill, that practical wisdom to know what's best in this kind of situation. So we can bring this practical wisdom developed through our own experience to our compassion and be able to discern what is the situation best requires. And if I can, I'll bring up, I'm not sure if you met Lama Yeshe. I was fortunate enough he's probably one of my greatest influences. I just want to share this because he's talking about bodhicitta, this altruistic aspiration to become the best person I can become for the benefit of others, if you like. When some people first hear about bodhicitta, they confuse it with a sentimental, highly emotional state of mind. Oh, how I want people to be happy. I cannot stand to think of their suffering. They feel so overwhelmed by the needs of others that their minds become depressed. But true bodhicitta is not like this. It has nothing to do with such an upset and paralyzed state of mind. Instead, it is clear and easygoing, possessing a calm wisdom as well as a deeply felt compassion. It is the attitude of opening our hearts completely and leaving it open as much as we can. So, so I like, although the sadness of compassion temporarily supplants our ability to be happy in the moment, we don't have to be afraid that we'll never be happy again. I can almost think of myself as a child that in that state, that this was going to go on forever. I don't think that clearly for myself. There's a sense that this will never end. But that's not the case as an adult. It's similar to loving kindness. We don't have to be afraid of having too much compassion. There's no such thing as too much compassion. There may be a lack of skill in how it's expressed. That's beside the point. And that we need to develop, for sure. The wisdom aspect, the skill and means, but not the compassion. We just have to apply our practical wisdom to how this compassion is being expressed. And one way we can talk about this is we're developing our intelligence, both cognitive and emotional. We can bring, and by emotional intelligence, there is intelligence within our emotions, but also we can bring intelligence to our emotions. The way we bring intelligence to our emotion is by the means by which we express those emotions, the wisdom, the skill and means. So more than not, our compassion is limited in scope. Usually it's only extended to a few, those nearest to us, maybe your immediate family, maybe a few very close friends, but also at times when we see others undergoing some kind of obvious and extreme suffering, maybe it's a war, maybe it's a natural disaster or a famine or something, a serious illness, maybe someone's just injured, and our hearts go out, our hearts open to that pain. But apart from our tendency to discriminate just who is and who is not deserving of my compassion, and apart from all the changing fortunes of others, the people constant shifting ups and downs of people's lives all about us, and including ourselves, the changing fortune of others from their side. Beyond all that, the fact is life, and this is what I began with, life is difficult. It's life is problematic. And that was the first teaching that the Buddha gave, was the truth of problems, if you like. And life can be difficult in that way. This is not to say that we're all equal in terms of our problems. That would be naive. That would be simplistic. It would be stupid. Life is more difficult for some than others. That's for sure. Much more difficult for some than others. Much more difficult for some than others, and for ourselves. For me, I feel very fortunate, this little prosperity that I happen to be living in. I acknowledge that this gifted life of mine, which most people on this planet don't share in. I'm aware of that. I have to keep reminding myself of that. But nonetheless, in some way or another, the Buddha taught that conditioned existence is characterized by 3 marks: impermanence, unsatisfactoriness. This is a temporary translation of the word dukkha, and lacking in inherent existence, lacking in independent existence. 3 marks: impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and lacking in inherent existence. If we wrongly conceive of ourselves or anything in our world as permanent, or as or independently existent, or inherently existent, then all of existence becomes problematic, is an occasion for some type of unsatisfactoriness. We could say suffering, but sometimes that word isn't quite applicable. because immeasurable compassion is conjoined with this deep understanding of this, then it extends to all beings at all times. Whether they're laughing or crying, still life is a problem. Whether they're rich or poor, still life is a problem. We don't know their history, what's going on behind that smile, that laugh, or what's behind their wealth. There may be a great deal of suffering going on. We can be sure that there's some problem if they conceive of anything as being permanent or inherently existent in some way, the misconceiving of the self and so forth. So it's unconditional, is what we're saying. That's, that's why it's immeasurable. Okay. So I'm going to go through how to meditate on immeasurable compassion, but before I go on, I've been talking for quite some time. Any thoughts or comments you'd like to make? Questions? Bill?
So, what is the difference between sympathy and pity?
Okay, sympathy. I can only go. Yeah, I mean, we could consult a dictionary. I mean, so sympathy means to feel with, that you feel the same as. The word sim, to have the same feeling. So if a friend of yours had a death in the family, you feel badly. Pity, I think there's a sense of, you feel with them. In pity, there's a sense of you as in sympathy there's an identification. There's a temporary permeable boundaries between yourself and them, and you enter into their feeling and you share their feeling. With pity, there is as if addressing an object. The person is being objectified. There's me over here. There's a certain sense of arrogance who is in a position of helper. I'm able to help you, and therefore, I think we can offer. That's quite often the way I think we approach our helping. In a very subtle fashion. I feel sorry for you. I'm going to help you. I remember, it's like in the difference between. I remember my teacher. This was when I lived in India. It not only matters. You could have. There's. I don't know. India is filled with beggars. And so, if you notice, some people, it's like they throw coins at beggars. And I was traveling with my teacher, he would take the coin and we'd place it in the beggar's hand. There was a sense of respect, a mutual respect. This person was in need of help, but nonetheless there wasn't a feeling of superiority or I don't know. Help me out on this, Bill. What do you think of helping as if this person were an object in which you could feel good about yourself and feel superior, self-righteous? What do you think, Bill?
Well, I think pity seems to be non-genuine, um, but I think it does seem like it's you know very different from sympathy. And I always heard that, always sort of understood, maybe implicitly, that sympathy, no, well, compassion was sympathy in action.
Sympathy in action. Um,
You can identify with someone that's in a bad place, but when you're being compassionate, you're trying to help in some way more directly.
yeah. Okay. So I think maybe we can. yeah, yeah, I think it's useful to get into the words. What I'm thinking of is the difference between empathy and sympathy. And empathy, in the equalizing, exchanging self for others, one of the two traditions of the development of bodhicitta, in the exchange of self for others, what you imaginatively approximate a feeling, what you approximate what imaginatively what this person must be feeling by going to your own experience. I've been there. I've been there myself. I know how that feels. Okay? So this person just had a death in his family. I've had a death in my family, and I know how that felt. I can understand how you feel. So there's a sense, you aren't identifying with that person. You can't know you can't exactly what that person is feeling, but you can go, you can have a parallel, you can go to a parallel experience in yourself and understand what that person is feeling. And so that's what I mean by empathy. In sympathy, you actually, as it were, identify with that person. You enter into that person's world, as it were, and there's a temporary, to some degree, loss of boundary, and you feel bad, and you feel you can actually regress into a childlike state. If you're less able. Maybe I'm going too far with this. There's a subtle, so sympathy. You enter into that person's world. You're feeling what they. For example, I don't. Let's say, I don't. Maybe I'm going too far with this. No. Okay. Let's say you have a child, and no. Let's say your husband or your wife or someone very close to you is giving a talk. Yeah, in front of a large group of people, and they're not used to this, and you're in the audience, and you can see that they're nervous, and what happens for you? You identify with their experience. The boundaries between, as it were, to some degree, begin to become transparent, more permeable. And maybe your heart actually starts to pound a little bit faster, and maybe you start to sweat. You actually are identifying with that loved one up there on that stage to the same degree. You're actually experiencing what they're going through, to some degree, as much as okay. So that's what I think sympathy involves. In empathy, you care and say, well, I've been on that stage before myself. I've given, maybe it wasn't, maybe it was just a group of my friends, maybe whatever. I've been in similar situations. I know how that feels. So there's a sense of the availability of some kind of perspective on what you're experiencing. I know how that, and you can actually talk to that person. You understand where that person is without identifying with them emotionally. I know how that feels because I've been there myself. But you're not entering into that person's feelings, as it were, and losing the ability to maintain some sort of perspective and make access your own practical wisdom of how to go about, if you can, helping that person. I don't know if that makes any sense. There's a certain perspective. We maintain a certain vantage point with empathy as opposed to sympathy. That's rather abstract, perhaps. I don't know. Maybe there's no difference. Maybe we're just quibbling words. Yeah. But I think there is a difference between pity and sympathy. Yeah. Pity, there's a sense of working with an object. We're not, yeah. There's little wisdom, there's little understanding.
But then compassion goes further, right?
Pardon?
Compassion goes one step further than sympathy.
Yeah, no, right. It's a desire to alleviate that suffering. Yeah.
Okay. That
So
helps.
then, but even with compassion, recognize that there are different levels of compassion. You can just it can start with just a preference. It'd be nice if you were happy. It'd be nice if you didn't suffer, rather than remaining completely indifferent. Perhaps the next step, even though it's only a minor step, would be, well, if I had a choice, okay, I'd rather you didn't suffer. Kind of something like that. And then from then on, it became, and then we could strengthen that. It'd be nice that if you didn't suffer, I wish you didn't suffer. I'm going to help you not to suffer. So, different degrees of involvement and strength in that. Commit myself to alleviating your suffering. Barbara, Zella?
There is so much there that I don't even really know where to start with it all.
Just,
I guess the thoughts that I've been having as you were talking is to just listen. Just listen.
Listen to what?
In terms of empathy, sympathy, compassion, pity is discarded. It's a whole different animal. I just think with all of them, listen.
Okay,
Just
good. Yeah.
listen.
I think, initially, and I mean, we can go into practical terms of how to apply compassion. But, for the most part, in most instances, in our daily life, people want to feel understood. Somebody understands where I'm coming from. And that in itself is of immense benefit. I feel understood. I don't feel so alone in this. Even if you can't help in practical terms. Even, as you said, listening can be a tremendous benefit to others. For most of us, we want to be understood. We want to share. Jay?
Yes, sir. Did you read my mind that I had something to say? Was that what happened?
No, I don't have that ability. I'm sorry.
I do. Yeah. Okay. One of the things that happened in my life was that when I started out as a social worker, I worked with chronically mentally ill for 2 years, and
Wow.
basically,
Congratulations.
yeah. Basically, I burnt out. And what had happened was I had philosophically had accepted materialistic philosophy. So this was all there was. And it was like, my God, if this is all there is, I had people who were suicidal all the time, everywhere, surrounded by them. And chronically suicidal. Yeah. And no amount of listening would alleviate that, which is very frustrating to me. So I called a timeout on social work, shifted gears, ended up spending 2 years in an ashram. And I can remember vividly while I was hanging up clothes, I was the housekeeper at the ashram. While I'm hanging up clothes, I'm thinking, what if there's something beyond this? And when I could seriously contemplate that this experience that these chronically mentally ill suicidal people were having, that this was only an experience, and it was a temporary one, and that there was something beyond this. That was a shift. And I was able subsequently to return to social work because the suffering was only one bit. This was not the whole story as it had felt previously. Am I making myself clear? Is that clear?
Sure, yes. Please go ahead.
So that for me was an incredible aha experience, being able to, it totally changed my ability I don't know what I was doing before other than, the classic burnout. It was just like, oh my God, I can't hear another piece of bad information. It's crushing my soul. And then it was like the next step was, this isn't their whole life. I can accept the fact that this is only a piece of the journey. I can walk beside them, be supportive, and know that at some point it'll end. And so that shifted me, and I did another 40 years of social work.
First off, I admire you a great deal for taking up that task. That's it's not easy, is it? Being out there, helping people day after day in that way. So you feel like what helped you to return was what? That this
This was not going to be the end of their experience,
okay.
that there was more.
How did and how did you come that you're hanging up the clothes?
And I'd lived at the ashram for a while.
Yeah.
And it's like obviously being surrounded by the concept of the possibility of reincarnation.
Okay.
So that was sort of the background, because I had before totally accepted that this life was all we had.
Okay.
I still
Okay.
crystal on reincarnation, I have to tell you that, but I can contemplate that that is a possibility. Thus, it has alleviated my sense when I see someone suffering that this is all they will ever experience. I now have a strong feeling that there is something else, and that, God, to put it very crudely, I think from a Buddhist point of view, like, this isn't the crude bit, from a Buddhist point of view, we have Buddha natures, we have a divine nature, and that in the end, that will be actualized.
Okay.
So my crude version of that is, this is all going to have a happy ending, no matter what it looks like, right?
Okay.
Trust me, when I choose a Netflix, I want a happy ending story. Dystopias.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. So that helped you to come back to your work with
Able to have empathy that was not consuming me, that was not eating me up.
okay.
Well,
I think I noticed you used the term Buddha nature and so forth.
yes.
And I think one of the I can only talk in theoretics. I haven't. That's why I say I admire the work that you were doing, or maybe you're still doing. I don't know. But it's one thing to have theories about things and be think of things in abstract, and on the other hand be very practical. But in terms of, I think there is a notion that mental health is fundamental. In a way we can call it Buddha nature or basic sanity or whatever. And that these distortions of mind are adventitious. They're not in the nature of the mind itself. So I know that some, healthcare providers, mental health care providers have tried to keep that in mind, trying to address, or trying, at least maybe even as best they can, address or keep it in mind that there's something, even in the most distorted individuals, there is an element of sanity that's always there. It may not be apparent, and addressing that and kind of having some kind of confidence or faith in that.
Yeah.
But that might be difficult to get you through the day sometimes, I admit.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for sharing. Thank you for sharing that, Jay. Appreciate that. Has that held you in good stead?
Definitely, most definitely. It has held me in good stead. I'm now retired, but I was able, particularly toward the end of my career and studying Buddhism, it's like I recognized that when I would be in various situations, that I was actually able to channel sort of more of a universal compassion. And that's what the whole, it was like, it felt a privilege to do that rather than a burden.
Okay, you're very
Yeah.
fortunate.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And frankly, I did feel I was very fortunate to be in the work I was and to have that opportunity and to recognize it. And there were times where I would be surrounded by my colleagues who would hang up the phone and, sort of as one does, express frustration, et cetera, et cetera. And I realized when I looked at them, I was actually in the presence of a bodhicitta who didn't realize it, because I had heard them on the phone prior to that and how they had dealt with situations. And I had been so deeply touched with their intensity and how they were so good to other people.
You did well.
Like I say, I've been very fortunate,
Yeah.
very fortunate. I know that.
Thank you for that. Let's talk about any other thoughts? Meditating on immeasurable compassion. So, a lot of our meditations, meditations on the Lam Rim, the graduated path, and so forth, but also included here in the Four Immeasurables, the cultivation of compassion is a discursive meditation. By discursive, I mean it uses thought. Yeah. But eventually, it becomes non-discursive. The thought, "May you not suffer," is not compassion. It's a verbalization of an emotion. It's the way we can verbalize a non-verbal state of being, state of mind. So initially, we bring thoughts to mind in the form of words. For example, "May you not suffer." Okay, but compassion is more of a feeling than a thought. Okay, it's not a state that I don't know if this makes any sense to you. It's not a state that radiates out from the words, these mental words that we've got moving through our minds. It doesn't radiate out from thoughts itself, as if the thought itself was compassion. Compassion, in quotation marks, is not compassion. It's not a state of mind. It's these words in our head, these verbal thoughts in our head. So thoughts may conceptually capture what compassion is about, but in itself it is not compassion. Then the question arises, and this carries over into other types of meditation, obviously. Then why use words? Why use thoughts? The thoughts that we make use of in meditation have the potential to catalyze something that is much deeper than thought. So the thought, "May you not suffer," is not the end product of the process. We use those words, "May you not suffer," to catalyze something which is the end product, which is a state of mind beyond words. So we know that, for example, if, I don't know about you, but I sometimes maybe we get caught up in ruminations. So, ruminating bad feelings about somebody. Oh, they did this and they did that, and blah, 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 blah. And the mind can go on and on and on and on. And these ruminations, maybe around hard feelings, can temporarily block feelings of love and compassion. We could be someone that normally we feel so close to and loving toward, and but they did something or one thing or another, and we go through our archive of memories and select out those memories which are biased in the direction of our present rumination, and we don't feel any love. We don't, at that moment, we don't feel love for that person who is our closest person in our life. We might feel hostility toward them, even. We have to admit that. But just as negative thoughts can obstruct, positive thoughts can serve to open up what is blocked. So, I think, we talked, Jay just talked about Buddha nature. It's not like we are developing compassion. Maybe that's not, I'm not sure how to put this. Maybe cultivating development. It's not like we're creating something that's not there. Compassion is there. Love is there within our minds. So these words are not designed to create compassion, but they can open our hearts to something which is already present in ourselves and allow them to flow forth into conscious awareness and find expression, both in terms of our mental qualities, but in terms of how we speak and act in the world. So they can help us to remove, and this is why I talked a little bit about resistance. The words can help us to overcome our resistance, which we have. I think it's in whatever you're meditating on, whether it's death or karma or whatever, we have resistance to some degree. We have a resistance to change in general. We like the familiar, however difficult it might be, it's home. It's the familiar. We feel comfortable in some ways. It's like an old pair of shoes with the nails beginning to stick up through the bottom. We can kind of we can get by. It's okay. We kind of don't take notice as best we can. So the words are like a template. Thoughts are like a template. They're the right shape. And we use them to create the space for something else to come up from an entirely different dimensions of our mind. So, a rough analogy is, and this is pretty rough. I was trying to think of anyway, I'll throw it out there and maybe it'll work anyway. You're queuing up. No, you don't say queue, do you? You're lining up. Sorry, I almost spoke Australian there for a second. You're lining up in going to a movie, or you're going to a Taylor Swift concert or whatever, and it's a long line. You stand in line, and you have to go to the bathroom. So you say to the person in behind you, "Would you hold my place?" Okay, and you go off, and you come back. So thoughts can serve as a placeholder that allows some space that facilitates the emotion that they refer to arise. They're the right shape. They fit. Discursive meditation using thoughts, words, and images are designed to open a door. But when the heart becomes open, then for example, in the compassion, in the meditating compassion, when the discursive technique may become an impediment, when we're actually feeling compassionate, then we set aside the discursive thought, the technique that we're making use of. When the thought starts to get in the way of the actual state, we let go of the technique and rest in the non-discursive awareness, that non-discursive state of compassion, which is beyond words. If you think, oh, I'm compassionate, you're probably not. Those very thoughts are probably interfering with you for the arising of compassion. Compassion is almost something we recognize retrospectively in reflecting. Wow, I really felt for that person. If you're thinking, well, I'm really being compassionate, you're probably not compassionate. Yeah, it's a trusting in. It's like I first came with this notion, and I hope I'm not. When a person there's in the path of, maybe I'm getting off onto a tangent. For example, meditating on emptiness. There's a point, and this isn't my experience. This is what I was taught, where the meditator, and I'm talking about people on the path, like skilled meditators. They know they're meditating on emptiness. They're going through all these various discursive techniques for the realization of emptiness. Refuting the object of negation, all this reasoning and so forth. But they reach a point when they actually have a realization. For a moment, emptiness has arisen in their mind, or not emptiness, a wisdom realizing emptiness directly. And then it wanes. And then they achieve a post-meditative state. During that period, there's no thought, oh, I'm meditating on emptiness, oh, I'm realizing emptiness. They're just resting in a state of that wisdom which is beyond thought. So the only way they know is what came before and what came after. They know they were meditating on emptiness prior to going into this absorption. And then they know that afterwards, maybe there's some subtle shift in their perspective, some understanding what wasn't there before. But during that period, they're resting in this non-discursive state. So we have to trust in that. And we cultivate compassion or whatever, and then there's some state that may arise. Whether it's an emotional state of compassion or love, whether it's a wisdom consciousness of some sort, an understanding of some insight that yes, I'm definitely going to die, something, a realization of that sort, and you simply rest in that state, non-discursively, and then you come out of it eventually, and then maybe you can retrospectively think, oh, okay. So we just abide quietly in what we are experiencing, rather than thinking. So you have less so here I'm talking about, you have less and less the sense that you are doing a compassion practice, and more of a feeling that you are simply opening your own inner goodness. If that makes sense. You're not manufacturing compassion. You're allowing an opportunity for compassion through this mental manipulation for compassion to arise. And you just abide in that. This isn't a silly escapism. It's not a matter of quietude. It's not a blank mindedness. You've done the work to get to this point, and then something happens, and you allow that. You just simply abide in that state. So it's important. Does that make sense? Okay. I mean, hopefully I'm not misleading you. I'm just trying to share. You make use of it as you will. So it's important to recognize that the object of compassion meditation is not compassion. It's a feeling. It's a being who is suffering. That's the object of our meditation on compassion, not compassion. oh, may I be compassionate, may I be compassionate. No, we're not even concerned with compassion. We're directed toward someone who's suffering and developing the wish to alleviate that suffering, whatever compassion is or isn't. So you sustain and rest in that feeling of compassion that is focused upon a suffering being. And we begin that, if we're going to begin it, which we may, with ourselves. And I emphasized this when we talked about loving kindness. If we're going to, if we're going to begin, we have to recognize that for the most part, if we're honest with ourselves, our own reality is the only one that we recognize to a large degree, initially at least. Our own suffering, our own difficulties and so forth, that we live with every day of our life. And if we can't wish ourselves well, if we can't wish ourselves not to suffer, I think it'd be difficult, I think. It's just as, we talked about in terms of loving kindness, the quotation by the Dalai Lama, that love must begin with ourselves. So too must, I think, compassion has to begin with ourselves. So we begin with ourselves, and then as we did with loving kindness, and as you do with many of these types of meditation, we begin to work with various categories of individuals. Beginning with, initially with a single individual ourselves, and then broadening out to those who we can most facilitate the development of that same attitude, emotion. There's a sense of, I think I mentioned that last week, of facilitation, that once you, it's like if you develop, for me, it's much more easy to talk about anger than it is compassion. If I'm angry, then it's easy for me to get angry at somebody else and somebody else. It's easy for me to direct that anger. Once I've got this adrenaline going, I've got all these, these chemical processes going in my brains, and these firings of particular pathways in my brain are being stimulated, and certain mind states are activated, and so it begins to simply shift the object of these mind states. It becomes much more simple, rather than generating this whole process toward individual categories. And this works with positive states of mind, for example, compassion. So if working with ourselves, when we can develop some compassion for ourselves fairly readily, we don't have to, it doesn't have to be exclusively with ourselves, but and a perfect compassion, whatever that might mean. But we have a sense that we really care about ourselves in that way. Then we can move on to those who are closest to, who we can readily develop that same state of mind, who we have a natural caring for, even if it's only fairly selfish caring for in certain ways. I think that's a part of our reality that we have to concern ourselves with. We have some self-interest involved in these objects of our family and so forth. If they're happy, I'll be happy, and so forth. And if they're suffering, it'll be difficult for me not to suffer, and so forth. So developing, moving out and out. But so from category to category to category, from those closest to those who are intermediate friends and so forth, to neutral strangers, and then those we don't get along with, or problems in our life we have difficulty with, to enemies. And I don't know if you hate people, but I don't think I hate people. But I know I develop hostility, dislike from time to time, anger. Okay, I work with those. And moving out to these various categories of individuals. I think it's useful, and you can make use of the handout that was given. There are, in each of those, there's 4 phrases which are connected with both loving compassion and loving kindness and compassion. But in each of those phrases has a particular explanation, but it's perhaps not all that important. Just as we did with loving kindness, beginning with some kind of reality. Do I have any suffering that I want to be free of? Are there any worries? Do I have any sicknesses? Am I in pain? All the sufferings that we have, and we're willing to bring them up, and the diversity of whether mental or physical, acknowledging that suffering, bringing that suffering in the mind, and acknowledging, I don't want this experience. And desiring to be free of it, and desiring to alleviate that. So may I be free of whatever it is. Something meaningful, not just something, but something which is some strong emotional investment in some way. And then sincerely, may I be free of this suffering. May I be free of this. I'm going to help myself. I'm going to alleviate that suffering. And just being with that emotion. May I be free of suffering. I'm going to free you of suffering. I think that it can be very powerful in that way. And then working with that for some time, whether it's weeks or months or whatever. And then when you have some facility around that, beginning to move on to others, including until you, ideally, as the word immeasurable is leading toward, limitless beings, limitless suffering. You have a sense as if there's a suffering world in which we're a part. May it not suffer. And just radiating out that wish to alleviate suffering. Without center, without edge, without boundary. Just that dwelling within that state. That's about it. Okay. So next week we'll go on to talk about the third and fourth immeasurables of empathetic joy, using that word empathy. Sometimes it's referred to, Bill, as sympathetic joy. I just kind of, whatever works. That's the phrase that I just use, whatever works. The Tibetans have a saying, if it helps heal the wound, use dog urine. Whatever helps us in our own self-development. We have personalizing all of these techniques, these methods. Finding out how they help us to access our own inner wisdom, our own inner love and compassion, and so forth. It's very. I think Buddhism puts a great deal of responsibility on ourselves. We don't have a God who we can turn to and say, "Please, God, make things better for me." It's. I remember when the Dalai Lama, this many years ago in Bulgaria, he was giving a talk, and it's all on our shoulders. It's not to mean that it's a sense of a burden, but it is our responsibility. And if we can accept that responsibility to some degree, we can begin to shoulder the responsibility in helping others as well. Okay, so we have about 2 minutes. Any final comments before we call it a day or a night where you are?
I have a comment, Jampa. When you said that thoughts are a placeholder, can you just, that was a fabulous statement. Then I want you to talk about it more.
Yeah, I thought the mind is a real mystery. I mean, I mean that quite sincerely, and it's quite an amazing. It's beyond comprehension. It's almost, yeah. Thoughts are a placeholder. You know, we're constantly trying to make the world intelligible to ourselves. We are sense makers. We're trying to make sense of our experience. You know, so, we should quit. Maybe we can talk about this next week. But imagine a baby who has no verbal abilities at present. And what is learning its world. And how does it make sense? And it's struggling to, even the thought, even when I say it's trying to make sense, what does that mean? You know, we're trying, imagine what a baby is going through as its first few years. Coming to, Alice just joined us. Is trying to make sense of its world, trying to make the world intelligible, so that we can gain some kind of control. You know? Words have power. If we have a sense that if I can label it, if I can name it, I have some control over it. I know what it is. I know what to expect from it. I know how to manipulate it. I know how it works. So I better stop. I'm sorry, Barbara. Maybe we can go on. It's quite a fascinating area, isn't it? But yeah. So the thoughts are placeholders for. Yeah. Okay, so I like to use the words, the placeholders that Shantideva uses in his dedication, if that's okay. He enumerates so many possible ways we could be compassionate and loving that it's hard not to, that enumerating them in this way, that it's hard not to be touched by one or two of them at a time. So, dedicating this positive energy that we've created together in this way. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, attain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drink. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. So thank you for making my morning worthwhile. I appreciate it very much. I'm a better person because of you guys. Thank you. See you next week.